from NCSE, everybody. I am Amanda Townley, and this is Random Samples. And so today I am joined by my colleague and good friend, Katie Hinde, Associate Professor in the School of Human Evolution and Social Change at Arizona State University. Katie, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me. It's always a great time to be talking with NCSE and you. And it's a really exciting time of the year.
Yes, it is. And it's getting closer to a very exciting time of the year, and that is March Mammal Madness time. So, can you tell us a little bit about how that came about? And for people in the audience who may not know, what is it?
Yeah, great question. Marshmallow Madness is a kind of over the top way of exploring the idea of who would win when two animals encounter each other. There's a lot of debate, tiger versus lion, shark versus grizzly bear, right? We have all these kinds of ideas about, relative battle readiness of different animal combatants. And this is a common conversation from kids to patrons sitting at tavern bar stools to scientists, right? That ask
Mm.
these things. And these are questions that have excited humans for tens of thousands of years. We know this from cave art and engravings and all sorts of really interesting works of creativity by humans all across the world. And this is a kind of way that scientists have come together and really sort of structured a systematic consideration of animals using the basketball March Madness bracket design. Instead, we have animal combatants and we showcase what might happen based on evidence in the natural history literature if those two animals were to encounter each other in a particular environment. We have a whole structured game universe where there's kind of predictive rules about what habitat they will encounter each other in and what comes to bear. But unlike the way these questions get asked in video games or in kind of conversations, the animals aren't just showing up in these thought experiment battles with their weaponry and their armor and their body mass and their speed and their temperaments. They're also, being considered in terms of their motivations and the context in which things are happening. And so the
Mm.
animals have all of their adaptations for battle, including the good judgment to withdraw from battles where the stakes are very low or there's nothing to be gained. So we do this every March. We have a 65 combatant lineup. It gets released in February. And then over several weeks in March into April, we have these kind of play-by-play story events in which scientists talk about the science in real time as though they're observing the encounter for the audience. This is hosted at the Arizona State University library, and all the resources are available within a LibGuide online at a .edu website so that people can access it wherever they are in the world.
That is fantastic. And, you talk about it being freely and easily accessible, especially to our K-12 teachers. March Mammal Madness has exploded.
Yeah.
What do you attribute that success to? It's so popular, not just in the United States, but around the world.
Yeah, no, this is, I mean, and it started in 2013. So it began just as kind of a lark on a Friday afternoon after the end of a long week. And there was a BuzzFeed Animal March Madness bracket that got released on social media. I printed it out for my lab to play, and it violated all these kinds of structural rules of March Madness basketball, right? So instead of 64 teams, it was 16. It was whichever animal was the cutest. And I and my lab, we really felt that a lot of really like amazing animals had been left off that list. And so I
Mm.
took the brackets back and I was like, give me an hour and made a new bracket. And then put it up on my blog, put it out on social media. And this was, a long time ago when these spaces were really, really friendly and playful and joyful and just kind of talked about the science of animal encounters. And I also highlighted some things about infant development and mother's milk because I'm a lactation specialist. And that is what brought me to mammals. It is our defining adaptive trait, our ability to make milk for young as a class and so I highlighted that We know about milk in far fewer species than there are mammals. So as the years have gone by, we've expanded it far beyond just the mammals we know about their milk. And indeed, in recent years, we've expanded it far beyond mammals. So now we have combatants from across the animal kingdom. We'll have plants, we'll have fungi, we'll have algae, we'll have lichen. It's really an opportunity to celebrate the tree of life in so many ways. And I think this is partly why it's been successful is one, people are really excited about animals. They're excited to, they know about animals already, many of them, but then there's animals they don't know anything about, and that gets really exciting. So there's opportunity of familiar and novelty at the same time. These kinds of questions of how they would encounter one another are already part of what people are thinking about and talking about on occasion. It creates a little bit more structure. And I think there's two things that have made the tournament really, really successful in that we have stories about the animals. So it's not just telling you facts, it's actually telling a story of the encounter. And then as different combatants advance in the tournament, they end up with these heroes' journeys through multiple rounds of a tournament, and they have, injuries or illnesses or things that are going on, and people grow attached to them as characters, even though they're very much only the way we do the thought experiment, they have no idea that they're battling. They have no idea that there is some tournament taking place. They're just animals and other species going about their daily activities and having these kinds of, encounters that we structure. Of course, we aren't actually fighting real animals. It's all very much
Disclaimer.
an empirically designed thought experiment. So we have the stories, and stories just people learn in stories. We tell stories, we think in stories. There's, kind of consistent story arcs across cultures. Animals feature prominently in them. We know that this has been going on for thousands of years. And so that story, I think, is part of what really resonates. The other thing that I think has made it really successful is that we really have a close relationship with educators that use it with their learners. It didn't necessarily we just, biology Twitter was just doing this for fun. And then teachers started grabbing it and sharing it with their students. And we ended up in these social media spaces, just basically biologists and wildlife biologists, animal biologists, ecologists, anthropologists, paleoanthropologists, paleontologists, all these different scientists started having these wonderful conversations with teachers, with learners, and it just kind of took away all those barriers and hierarchy of discussion and kind of turned into this amazing community. So it started that way. And then as we learned that educators were using March Mammal Madness, we started doing more to facilitate that. So we started developing lesson plans and then hosting teachers' educational resources that they're making independently. And over the last decade, we've just really systematically listened to how people are using it in the classroom and grown the tournament to make it more user-friendly for learners of all ages. So there's elements that are really good for elementary school students and middle school students and high school students and college students. And we have a lot of lifelong learner players that aren't doing it through formal education, but are making use of these educational resources in their work environments, in their friend groups, in their family gatherings. And it's really been spectacular to watch how it's grown.
I can't even imagine. I know that we at NCSE play it every year, and it gets really hot and contentious, in a good way. In a good way. Sparkle Muffin definitely caused some issues. I'll let people look that one up and figure it out. But you're talking about how this started as just something fun to do in a small group, and how many teachers did you reach last year?
In 2024, we have teachers, they can sign up for an
Mhm.
email that will let them know where to find all the educator resources, and then we invite them to participate in our survey. And teachers have been wonderfully active in participating in our survey. So we know how many teachers are requesting materials, and then they tell us how many students they plan to put the bracket in the hands of. And so in 2024, we had 9,400 plus educators, and they told us they were going to share the bracket with 870,000 learners, which,
Woo!
I mean, it's like, I mean, I'm blown away. We were able to actually study where educators are, and a majority of them are in the US, although we do have representation across all continents except for Antarctica. We're coming for you, McMurdo. Um, and but we in the United States, we discovered that in half of all counties in the United States, at least one educator is using March Mammal Madness with learners, and that this follows the US population. So we're in all geographic areas of the United States. We're in cities and suburbs and in rural and remote learning sites. And it really seems to get, resonate with people everywhere because people everywhere find animals fascinating and they find
Mhm.
debates about which animal would win, engaging and fun thought experiments and conversations.
Absolutely. And I've known you for years, and you're so great to always give credit to the teams and just droves of people that have supported this project through the years. But I have to also give you credit for the fact that you've always been an incredible science communicator. What feeds your passion for that?
Yeah, and I mean, I think that thank you for that. And I am going to answer that question, and then I am going to talk about the team because I think these are kind of related things. So my dad was a folk musician, and he was an activist for peace and community. And he was a veteran and came back from Vietnam and just really dedicated his life toward um, peace. And he decided to be a street singer. So he played music on the street, and he was like, if I only play to paying audiences, I'm just speaking to people that already agree with me
Oh.
or already think what I think. And so he was
Mhm.
very much about like in order to be the fulcrum on which the world turns, you have to meet people where they are. And so I think, it was really funny because I remember when I told him that I was studying biology and anthropology and was really excited to be a scientist. He was at first very disappointed in me. I remember we were driving in Seattle, Washington, and he's like, "So science, huh?" I hear the University of Washington has a really good creative writing program. And and to him, he had, he really wanted to reach people with his message. And I
Mhm.
explained to him that science is a really fascinating way to understand the world,
Mhm.
and it gives you a language of curiosity and systematic exploration. And that I agreed with him that the power of science is really going to depend on how we share science with all the people that
Mhm.
are impacted by the things we learn. And so I think that kind of appreciation for performance and meeting audiences where they are and sharing your excitement and the things you care about is just kind of both in my genes and my environment
Mhm.
as I was
Yes.
growing up. And so I think that spark seed of loving science and loving sharing it with the community is was that original part of Marshmallow Madness. And then this is what has made it so spectacular is as it launched, colleagues and friends started playing. They were super engaged with it. And at the end of that 2013 year, my friend Chris had helped me because I had started it and had no idea what it was going to be. Didn't I thought my mom was going to play. And then it ended up kind of people got into it. And I had scheduled to go do pilot work with meerkats in the Kalahari over spring break. And so I'd have to stay up all night when the internet worked in the middle of the night to tweet out battles. And my wonderful colleague and friend since grad school, Chris Anderson, was like sending me like key scientific details from the US to put into the battles and helping me out that way because I was very remote. It's very kind of him.
Mhm.
And then at the end of that first year, everybody's like, "All right, see you in 2014." And I was like, "Oh my gosh, I can't do this alone." And Chris and Josh Drew and Christy Luton, who had been some of the most, enthusiastic players that year, I recruited them to come and help me narrate the battles. And that next year, the team of four of us, we created a schedule. Like there'd been no schedule. Like we had a systematic schedule. Like this night we'll do this division. This night we'll do this division. And there was like this account that interacted with us a lot, right? Like they were way into it. They were cheering. They were, and we didn't know who they were, right? And at the end of that year, it turned out that it was a whole bunch of tattoo artists in Washington, D.C. And the tournament battles would start right as they closed the shop. So they'd go next door um, for evening libations and follow the battles. And they came to us, and this is Karen Henning, and she was like, "Hey, next year, can we do art of the different combatants?" And I maybe said not appropriate for the classroom words of enthusiasm that absolutely,
Yes.
heck yeah, heck yeah, you can. And and um and then the next year Anne Stone came and was like, it'd be really great to feature the genetics of the different species. And
Hmm.
then the American Society of Mammalogists started sharing photos from their photo archive, and Oxford University Press got involved. And then Annalee Perry, who's the open science librarian here at ASU, came to me and she's like, have you ever thought about using a LibGuide? I think it would work really well for March Mammal Madness instead of my janky
Wow.
blog. And then Will Nickley was this graphic designer, and he's like, I mean, not that you can't make your bracket in PowerPoint, but here's a graphically designed one and very nice. Like, and so that this is the thing that like has always like just humbled me so much, is that every time that Marshmallow Madness has grown and improved, it's because people that love the tournament, that have their expertises and their talents, show up and they say, hey, what about, hey, could we? And so like I've just kind of been this sort of like steward of this growing community of brilliant creators and scientists and scientist creators and creative scientists. I mean, it's just been this kaleidoscope of talent that just makes it possible year over year. And like indeed, this is how NCSE and Marshmallow Madness started chatting, is you see what we're doing. I've for decades been a fan of NCSE's like amazing multi-pronged approach to improving science education in this country through policy, through curricula, through trainings. And so every year the tournament expands in these new ways that just make it better at what it's already doing spectacularly. And I have to give so much, there's no way it could be what it is if it were just that original spark. It's grown. One might even say each year it's, descent with modification. And and until it's become this just, incredibly both specialist and generalist being, depending on how people
Hmm.
want to play the tournament. Like you can just play with the bracket. Anybody anybody can play the bracket. And then
Yes.
we have people that dive so deep and do like intense research and like come back with like, well, is it, this phenotype or this phenotype that's going to
Hmm.
be the combatant? And I'm like, I definitely knew that there were multiple phenotypes, and you will find out on March 17th what it is, I
I
think.
love it. It'll be interesting to see if, as a result of this interview, there is now going to be someone developing a genealogy of March Mammal Madness.
One, I mean, one could, and I mean, like, that's a great opportunity to talk about. Dr. Chen is a bird paleosystematics specialist, and Dr. Chen has created a phylogeny of all the combatants and updates it
Love
every
it.
year. And it's a poster that can be printed out for classroom use, right? And
Oh,
it's
wow.
all the combatants across time, right? So you can, so I know that you were talking about the genealogy of how the tournament has grown
Mhm.
with, new contributors, but you can also do it of the 650 plus species
Wow.
featured since the beginning. And I look at that phylogeny and I think, yeah, we really overrepresent the carnivores and the artiodactyls and the primates, and I do not apologize for that. Those are amazing. amazing taxonomic groups. I do get a lot of complaints from rodent and bat biologists about that though.
Well, at least it gives you something to keep your eyes on to kind of balance it out as you go. You can add
Oh
a
yeah.
little more here and a little more there, but that's
Yeah, no,
phenomenal. And go ahead.
definitely. Like yeah, we doing that analysis allowed us to recognize what orders we were missing that we'd never
Mhm,
featured from the mammals. And so that we definitely, got to catch them all. Uh definitely have kept that in mind.
mhm. And then the side effect is this beautiful classroom resource.
Yeah.
I mean, that is tremendous.
Available at the freely available in our ASU Keep collection, right? So everything we update all the materials every year. I know NCSE is planning some really, has adapted some of your existing lesson plans to harmonize with 2025 combatants. So folks that were at NABT got a sneak peek
Mhm,
at what some of that might be. And it really, we want, as education funding becomes threatened, as
mhm,
resources become commercialized, and as access to science education becomes uh, scanter and scanter, these open educational resources become a really, key component for educators in lots of different spaces. And it's also really exciting to be able to provide resources that we know are going to excite a lot of their
mhm,
students. Right. So like if you walked in, as you walk into a classroom with a list of 65 organisms and say, where do they live? What do they eat? What are their threats? What ecosystems, what are their ecosystem roles? And then people had to fill out those worksheets. That would be onerous, busy work. But if you take that exact same list of animals and you say,
mhm,
or organisms, and say, who do you think wins in a series of one-on-one matchups? All
mhm.
of a sudden, finding out that information of what do they eat, what size are they, how do they
Yes.
behave, where do they live, right? All these things all of a sudden
Mm,
become relevant to
right.
thinking through kind of these different contingencies, and students can scaffold knowledge together where they, make arguments from evidence and then think in these kinds of different contingencies, like, well, in this habitat this would happen, or in this kind of setting this could happen, and this is what we know these animals are dealing with at this time of the year. And because it's spring in the northern hemisphere but it's
Mhm.
fall in the southern hemisphere, and we bring in these aspects of earth sciences to the tournament.
It really is fantastic. And, the best learning happens when you're having fun. And it's also a best practice for reaching students on a deeper level, which is fantastic. So you mentioned a little bit about teachers at NABT. So you presented as
Yeah.
our evolution symposium for NABT this year. What did you think about it and how did it go?
Oh, well, NABT remains. I've sadly only gotten to go twice. I've decided to add it to my regular attendance conference because it is the most wonderful community of scholar educators I've ever encountered. Like, people are just so enthusiastic there. They're so collaborative. They're so thoughtful. They have such expertise on how to teach. I mean, I learn so much every time I step into one of those rooms at that conference. And yet it also is just it's the warmest place, right? Everybody is there because they share this enthusiasm for biology and for teaching. And everybody is there to it's like this amazing evolutionary process of mutation and recombination and people exchanging ideas, and there's so much. I've grown so much. And I one of the things that I think is particularly beautiful about NABT is every single conversation I had was just enthusiastic and collaborative, and nobody seemed to have any investment in being the smartest person in the room or the smartest person in the conversation. It just was about, like, we are here because there's so much to learn and scaffold. It felt like the best learning environment, which you would expect, because these are the teachers that are creating the best learning environments for topics that can sometimes be very challenging to teach. So at the meeting, you guys hosted the evolution session, And I was able to kind of talk about the way evolution has shaped us as humans and our adaptations for how we learn. So, an extraordinary amount of evolutionary social science has really demonstrated the ways that humans learn, who we learn from, right? So we learn from individuals we perceive to be knowledgeable or experts or successful or that we have access to. And we learn a lot from our peers. We learn in story form, especially. We learn when our emotions are engaged, right? Which doesn't necessarily mean that we're happy, right?
Hmm.
I've definitely learned from March Mammal Madness that people really remember when their pick loses and what scientific information was involved in that outcome. And they talk to me about it, which is delightful, right? But like more people talk to me about when their combatant lost than when their combatant won. Like it's amazing. Like when they were right, like right. So like people can that emotional engagement, it can be whatever excites us, right? And that excitement might take the form of sadness or anger or shock or surprise or joy. It can be all those things. So the thing that's really nice with Marshmallow Madness is there's so many iterations of battles that sometimes you're right and sometimes you're wrong. So you get to
Hmm.
explore like the whole suite of emotions, and so that's been really exciting. Um, we know that people learn in community, and so with Marshmallow Madness, people end up playing this in community. So
Hmm.
they might have an online community that they play with. They might have their classroom. They might have their after school science club. They might have their family. They might have their work environment. Like people build, like as you said at the NCSE, right, at the National Center for Science Education, you guys play many of your team, and it gets it that social dynamic, that joking, that celebrating, that sneering, that trash talking. Oh,
Yes.
so much fun. It's amazing like how that joy of playing and learning simultaneously is
Hmm.
such a big part of the human condition. Um, we learn stories are really we know that we learn from stories that when you have a story structure, um, learners are able to detect inconsistencies faster. They retain information for longer and better. They end up, because of the story form, they will retell the story to each other and in other settings. And so there's like an oral tradition that has emerged from March Madness Madness where people know about events in past tournaments that they didn't play, but they've learned about from other players, which I think
Hmm.
is just an amazing thing to hear. And in the classroom setting, one of the most common things we hear back from educators is that they have students that have graduated out of their classroom that come back to get a bracket year after year. These students might have like, you know, been in that middle school classroom, they come back as high schoolers. We hear about high school classrooms where college students stop back by and they'll talk about how these learners at different stages will end up engaging about it, right? So like
Wow.
an alumni visitor to a classroom will come back and they'll talk about like, oh, my year, this happened. And the new learners are like, what? And they talk about like who they you have these conversations that kind of span micro generations and help
Hmm.
build connections in these really exciting ways. I'll also say that Marshmallow Madness kind of democratizes the classroom. So, like, the teachers don't have the answer. There's no answer key for them, right? They're playing right along with their students and they're experiencing emotions right along with their learners. And it also, like, different, sometimes students that haven't yet fallen in love with science, a bracket can be their gateway to it, right? So they might be
Got it.
really, really involved in sports or they might be really familiar with brackets. And all of a sudden, they know things in that classroom and are helping their fellow learners, like how to fill out a bracket, how to think about bracket dynamics, and we hear about that from our educators. So that learning in community, that excitement, that story, all of these, the fact that we're featuring animals, right? We are our cognitive architecture makes learning about animals something that is particularly relevant, and you
Hmm.
find that there's more attention to animals in the human mind. that that human minds are hungry to learn about animals, because when you're a kid, animals are, dangerous, and learning about how to navigate those dangers in an ancestral landscape would have been a very strong selective pressure. And so we bring all of this together, and I I I I will say that I was familiar with that research. A lot of my colleagues are the ones that are doing it, right? I've seen talks about,
Hmm.
but I'd never realized that I was, unconsciously embedding all of that in the design of March Mammal Madness. It was just, hey, let's talk about the science of animals and what happens if they were to encounter each
Hmm.
other. And so when we were writing up some of our survey results and publishing on the tournament, it was a really great opportunity to kind of weave together, like, if one were to design something that would most tap into the psychological and cognitive adaptations of interest in the human mind, I don't think we could have done a better job, right? Like, it was really amazing. So it was really great at NABT to be in the Involution Symposium and talk about our adaptations as humans
Hmm.
for learning and storytelling, and then put Marshmallow Madness in that context. And then after I gave my presentation, there was this amazing, amazing lesson plan that was introduced by Blake and Jeff. When people, like, when we are able to have people suspend their disbelief to the extent that,
Yes.
they think scientists are actually doing, like,
Yes.
like, it's so real. We are able
Yes.
to create such a realness that,
Yes.
I mean, that just lets us know how successful we've been,
Hmm.
right? It's like, yeah, we know who the champ, some of us know who the championship bracket goes out, because we do have to have that kind of,
Hmm.
we have to have continuity, we have to have plausible
Hmm.
evidence-based arguments, and we have to create a compelling storyline
Hmm.
for the animal that will be champion and the animal that will be runner-up, right? They
Hmm.
go through, to get to the championship battle, you go through at least 6 encounters. So you have to have that story.
Hmm.
And sometimes, as I discussed at NABT, we, based on the evidence, we calculate the probability of an outcome, and then we use a random number generator to determine what that outcome is, right? So in some ways, this is the most elaborate animal-based, science-based game of Dungeons and Dragons that's ever existed, right? Because you have these, character journeys that, have some amount of probabilistic outcomes, and
Hmm.
then you have to, curate a compelling storyline that justifies those outcomes. And sometimes it gets real tricky, right? And I still hear about orca versus lionesses routinely. I've never gotten more emails than for that championship battle of orcas versus lionesses. And that, I get those emails because people are really, really invested, and it's wonderful. It's wonderful to
Yes.
hear back, even when people are sending me their gripes. It means, like, their gripes are, I learned these things and I expected this outcome, and then we have, like, this whole kind of dialogue about how
Hmm.
it goes down, and in the evidence, and
Hmm.
it's a really extraordinary festival of learning.
It is, and it's such a rich environment to be a part of and be engaged in the battles as they're ongoing. But it's also such a rich existing and carrying on environment historically, because you can go back and go through all of those pieces, like you said, and have this background of the things that have been included and how things have gone. And so it's really just, it sounds like it's taken on this wonderful and very, very empowering life of its own, not just for scientists and lovers of science, but especially our K-12 teachers and students in classrooms all over the world.
Now that we have the library team that we're archiving, we have archives of, even though social media platforms might rise and fall, we have the archive, right? We have an archive of every Marshmallow Madness tweet from the team that's ever existed. Yep, it's all at the ASU library. It's in the digital repository. People can access all of those resources. And we are every year making more resources available so people can do deeper dives, right? So people can get involved as deep as they want. Educators can, so we hear from educators that tell us about school-wide tournament competitions, right? Where, like, there's a bracket competition among the teachers and the administration, right? Like, beat the principal is an award. We hear about people using it in language arts and visual arts classes, and so we actually have lesson plans for the sciences, for social studies, for arts, so that if your entire school has caught the madness, there's ways for bridges across the classrooms for all the teachers, and that helps kind of, we know that art enhances learning of
Mhm.
science. We know that translating basic science into kind of applied sciences in the social studies, and we have a lesson plan about the history of the park system,
Mhm.
and how you can look up which animals are in which parks in your state, and really try and help that the ways in which we build connections across all these different subject areas, so that they're mutually reinforcing and they're reaching students that see themselves as having strengths in different areas, and helping them build confidence more broadly across their education.
That's absolutely tremendous and such powerful work. So,
Yeah.
I have to ask the big question.
Yeah. Yeah. Ask anything.
Are there any hints that you can share with us about March Mammal Madness coming up this year?
Yeah. Yeah. So that's a great question. It's really funny is like once I know the champion, I kind of become a hermit because I'm like, I'm gonna give it away. I'm terrible at keeping secrets, and yet I have secret responsibilities. Um, so I will say, now this next year is going to be the 13th tournament since it began, which I never would have imagined that we'd be where we are. And so what we've been able to do is, so 2024 was the 10th tournament since the dawn of the art team. And so the 2024 tournament really celebrated the arts. So each of our divisions was related to something about the arts. So we had, the visual arts, and that was all species that were really vibrantly colored. So it was the
Mhm.
rainbow collection. And then we had a division called Take a Bow. And these were species that give very notable performances in
Mhm.
nature, right? So they might have a very elaborate mating dance, or you have a parent that does a broken wing display to lure predators away from the nest. And so we had a culinary arts division that was animals that had really bizarre adaptations for what they ate and consumed,
Mhm.
and had a real nice time talking about food webs. So I would encourage anybody to think about what was something that we introduced new to the tournament 10 tournaments ago. I have mentioned it. Depending on how this interview gets edited, it was in one of my earlier answers. So people could get a clue that way. We can also highlight that 2025 is the 100th anniversary of the Scopes monkey trial and the teaching of evolution in classrooms, and the ways in which organic life is all connected on our planet. So I can say that this coming year might have something to do with all those things I just said. And
Mhm.
I'm very happy that NCSE and NABT are hosting a free webinar in honor of Darwin Day, in which some very specific information will be revealed about the tournament. So we will be announcing the tournament theme and divisions at the NCSE NABT March Mammal Madness Darwin Day webinar. So those, and I would also say last, if you got one of the limited edition NABT, NCSE, March Mammal Madness magnets at the meeting, uh, I can say that all the species on that magnet are combatants.
Ooh. So
So,
wonderful hints and wonderful things for people to look forward to, and
yeah,
hopefully join us at that
yeah,
Darwin Day event to learn more.
absolutely. Yeah, and I will say I'm being pretty secretive because we found out that educators, and this, I had always imagined this, and then it turns out it's actually working. So we release Valentines.
Mhm.
So science-based Valentines of combatant species every early February. We have we have different kinds of games that we release some of the combatant species. And it turns out that some teachers provide extra credit points to students who accurately guess what the divisions are based on what species have been
Oh,
linked.
wow.
And then once the divisions get announced, some teachers award extra credit points for students that guess other species that are going to be combatants in that division, right? And this
Oh,
this is
wow.
part of the magic of the Marshmallow
Hmm.
Madness preseason, right? Is because it's before the bracket's been announced, but people start talking about different ways of organizing species, different categories that might emerge, different species. And so people end up learning about a lot more than just the combatants of record because we start speculating about it in February before everything goes public.
That is absolutely incredible. Well,
Yeah,
we're
it's
really looking forward to it.
yeah. Thank you so much, Amanda. Thank you to the NABT. Thank you to NCSE. We're just so excited for the ways in which we're bringing our strengths together to really deliver a tournament that I have no doubt will be the best one yet.
Well, we cannot wait. So, thank you
Yeah.
for joining me for Random Samples, Katie. We really appreciate it. And hopefully, we'll see everyone tuning in to Darwin Day and then playing a little bit of March Mammal Madness for 2025.
Yeah. And remember, if you're learning, you're winning.
Absolutely.